QAAFI, or the Queensland Alliance for Agricultural and Food Innovation, which is quite a mouthful, is divided into 4 centres. So we've got an agricultural and a food focus, obviously. But one of the things about it is the applied nature of our research. We're very much focused on industry and industry outcomes in the agricultural sectors and the food sectors. But for those of you who don't actually have an agricultural food background, we welcome any scientists, because most of our research is so very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. My own background is chemistry. I'm sitting in the Centre of Animal Science. I don't particularly have an animal science background, but I use my chemistry for animal science outcomes. So we do welcome all students in these areas. So from chemistry, biochemistry, molecular, bioinformatics, genetics, molecular, microbiology, biotechnology. Anyone who has an interest in doing applied type research for increasing food production, all those feel-good outcomes, we can find a space for you that you will fit in. You just have to, there's a booklet of honours projects. We've got more than 70 honours projects on this year. We are really keen to get honours students. QAAFI itself is not as an old an institute as IMB and AIBN, perhaps not as well known, but we have real impact research where we actually do impact in the industries just as much as produce scientific outcomes. So I'm going to hand over to my centre representative. So we've got the Centre of Crop Science, the Centre for Nutrition and Food Science, the Centre for Horticulture Science, and the Centre for Animal Science. Before I do hand over, though, I do have to say that we also have diverse locations as well as diverse science. So while AOB and IMB are located primarily at St. Lucia, QAAFI has spaces around the state. We have quite a large presence at St. Lucia, but we equally have a large presence at the Eco Sciences Institute over at Dutton Park and the Health and Food Science precinct at Coopers Plains. The reason we have these places is because we have a direct link with industry. So we've come out, we're straightly linked with the Department of Agriculture and Food Innovation. So if you really want to have a practical focus on your research, as well as obviously pure science, we would welcome you to join QAAFI. We have other diverse locations. No one is forced to go to move out of Brisbane, but if you want to do a research project in regional Queensland, we can find somewhere for you, from Warwick to Nambour, and even further afield. So I'll just hand over to my research representatives.
Thank you very much, Mary. So the next speaker is Professor Ian Godwin. Ian, do you want to unmute?
Yep, yeah, thanks. Hi everyone, so I'm the Director for the Centre of Crop Science. So to give you a bit of an idea of that centre, we work on everything from nucleotide level stuff right up to satellite imaging, all the way through genes, cells, plants, paddocks and farming systems. The whole of the centre, we're at 4 places. So we've got presence at St. Lucia, at the Gatton campus, we're also in Toowoomba and in Warwick. And the picture of me holding up a beer there is to remind me to tell you that that is actually the first use of biotechnology, and to my mind still one of the best. But also to remind me to tell you that a lot of what we do in the Centre for Crop Science is we work predominantly on the major crops like the cereals and the legumes, and the cereals provide about 65% of human nutrition worldwide. Could I get the next slide, please? So we've got 3 main themes within our centre, which is crop improvement, crop physiology and modelling, and farming systems and agronomy. And as the pictures show, we've got all the way from working at the subcellular level, doing a lot of gene editing work to improve these crops, a lot of work on physiology, which could be in glass houses, in the field. We're always running field experimentation. And a lot of the focus that we've got with the crops that we're working on is in end-use quality, but also in the sustainability, giving us things like heat tolerance, drought tolerance, finding ways to turn over generations more quickly, etc. And so the bit of the word cloud in there shows you a range of the sorts of things that we work on, including some of the for crops. And I'm not sure if I said this, but we've got over 100 scientists within this centre, and it's pretty easy to find you a project where you can be lab-based, where you can be field-based, or whether you can sit on a computer and analyse remote sensing data. And to give you a bit of an idea of how good the remote sensing and machine learning data is now that it's being generated, we can make crops with gene editing to have higher protein contents, for example. And from about a 1 metre squared area, remote sensing using satellites can actually pick up protein diversity across a field trial. So that's the sort of the scale of the work that is involved in the Centre for Crop Science. So thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Our next speaker is Dr. Louise Parkinson.
Hi.
Hi,
Yes, that's me. I'm for CHS though, so I think I'm the next few slides, unless you're happy for me to share my screen. Yeah, there we go. Okay, hello everyone, I'm Louisa. I did my honours with SCMB and I did the Bachelor of Biotech program in plant biotechnology, and I did my PhD with QAAFI, as well as my honours project was a QAAFI project, and now I work for QAAFI. QAAFI, I just want to let everybody know, we are actually the #1 agricultural institute in Australia, and we're in the top 5 in the entire world. The kind of research that we do is fantastic and high impact, and I just love working for this institute. So let's go to the next slide. So in the Centre for Horticultural Science, we have 3 research themes: plant pathology, biotechnology, and breeding. So plant pathology is a huge field, and there's many of us based at ESP, or Eco Sciences Precinct. I work at the Eco Sciences Precinct, and the things that we focus on is in identifying disease and discovering new species, as well as diagnosing disease. So one field is taxonomy, which is what I work in, and I sit there and I analyze genes of new species of fungi, and I discover new species and I write about it. Sometimes we go out into the field and we find completely new diseases that are new records for Australia, and the sorts of things you can do is that as well. And those papers get published and it's a first record, and it's super exciting. So on the right here is a phylogenetic tree that I made and published as a student, and you can see a cool little scientific diagram I made of a fungal structure called a conidiophore. You learn taxonomy language, which is a whole language in itself, and you'll have lots of experience in a PC2 lab. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's the fields of science which you can get skills in. Another thing, next slide please. What I also work in, and my honours student works in, is in diagnostics. So with COVID, for example, researchers had to rapidly scramble to develop tests to be able to rapidly diagnose disease in patients. We actually do the same thing, but for plants. And it's super important for biosecurity. We want to make sure and protect our country from exotic pests and diseases that we don't have, because it can have dire effects on the entire industry. And there's a lot of molecular skills you can gain from that as well. Bioinformatics is a big component of that when you design diagnostic tests. So that there's some skills you can get from that too. And the final slide for plant pathology, is integrated disease management. So who here loves travel? Because this is the kind of work that you'll be doing. You'll go out into orchards, you'll diagnose disease, you'll learn firsthand experience, what it's like to interact with growers and see what disease looks like in the field. So our researchers, Elizabeth Dan, who I did my PhD with, I don't have an agriculture background, but when I started my PhD with her, I now know all about the avocado industry and how tree crops are grown. So you'll learn that kind of stuff too. You'll also get some biochemistry knowledge and all sorts of other skills with this sort of work too. So if you love being out in the field, IDM is the kind of work you want to do. Okay, next slide. I did my honours in biotech, and we also have biotech at the Centre for Horticultural Science, and that's based at St. Lucia. And they do all sorts of really cool things. Tissue culture is one of my favorite things they do over there. So can you imagine being in Bunnings, right? It's a huge building, and think about nurseries. Nurseries have to grow plants in large facilities like that. But if you can grow an entire nursery in a small lab through tissue culture, that's saving so much space and time and resources. And that's the kind of stuff that they do with tissue culturing avocados, for example, at Nina Mitter's lab. So you can check them out. Final slide for CHS. So if you love computational biology and working with computers and coding and programming, this is the kind of stuff you want to do. And that's all about breeding and designing and statistical modeling and predicting how plants are going to grow in the best way they can. So our researchers, Craig Hardner especially, he has a lot of stuff to do with predictive modeling, and if that's the kind of thing you want to do, get involved with that. And I highly recommend having a bioinformatics or computational biology skill set by the time you graduate, because we do quite a bit of it no matter what science field you're in. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Dr. Sandra Olata Mantilla.
Yeah, thank you. It is, yeah, we'll be there. One more before, please. That's good. So hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Sandra Olarte Mantilla. I'm a sensory and consumer scientist within Synapse. And this particular picture is from the opening of our ARC training center for uniquely Australian foods. That was pre-COVID time. And what you can see there is the diversity of our team of students, postdocs, and well, in fun times. Yep, next one, please. So in our center, we have a strong team of chief investigators leading postdocs and students. There are 9 investigators with a strong expertise areas, led by Mike Idley, who is studying plant-based foods and nutrition. Also, we have Jasmina Sultanbawa studying preservation technologies, food safety, and native foods, and also working with Australian indigenous communities. Heather Smythe working on flavor chemistry, sensory and consumer science. Yes, you do get to taste a lot of exciting food products. And Daniel Cosolino working on non-destructive and rapid analytical methods like mid-infrared spectroscopy. Michael Nexel working on nutrition on phytochemicals like folate in strawberries. Eugenie Rora working on nutritional chemosensing in pigs. Timo Herr working on biofortification in purple sweet corn as an example. Lou Hoffman working on everything with science. Bob Gilbert working on starch, glycogen, understanding the structure, function, and biosynthesis of a starch like potato, barley. Next one, please. Thank you. So we have 24 honors projects available, and some of them are in honey from European bees, native stingless bee honey, edible insects, which I am particularly working on, understanding, well, these projects are all multidisciplinary and requires different skills that even if you don't have them, you are able to learn them. So we go from the chemistry, sensory, microbiology in the honey, but also on Australian native ingredients. We do product development in these projects, microbiology, sensory. Another project is working on premium products like Wagyu beef, understanding the mouthfeel of the fat on Wagyu beef from the sensory point of view, and understand using techniques like rheology and rheology to understand the texture of the fat. In biofortification, we have an example which is with purple sweet corn. And we will have the chance to use chemistry skills, sensory science, molecular biology. We also have projects understanding why we have different perceptions on the texture on food from the point of view of sensory science and involving other disciplines like chemical engineering and biochemistry. And we also studying the impact of climate change, the impact that the stress that creates on lactating sows. And we use skills from molecular biology, microbiology, and computational science that is led by Eugenie Rohr. So if you have any questions, just go to our website and just get in contact with us. In the questions, just please free to send me a text. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. So the last speaker for QAAFI is Dr. Ali Raza.
Hello, everyone. I am Ali from Center for Animal Science. I'm working as a postdoctorate fellow in the center. So I'll go through the different research groups which you can apply for your honors project. Next slide, please. So the Center for Animal Science is a leading tropical livestock research and development institute. And we are providing world-class research to the Australian animal industry. We have three different research themes, which are animal health, which covers the diseases and the causative agents, animal welfare, and different production systems. So I'll quickly go through the profiles of different researchers so you can have an idea what sort of research we are doing. Next slide, please. Professor Ben Heiss is a genetist, and he is working on cattle genetics to improve the health and productivity of cattle. His group has a very cool different projects ranging from genomics, use of RNA-seq technologies, all the high throughput sequencing technologies and data science to improve the production in Australian cattle. As well as they're trying to use the next-gen sequencing technologies to use the sequencing technologies into the field, and the sequencing can be done within 24 hours in the field conditions. They're also working on studying the DNA methylation to determine the age of cattle. That's a real applicable project in the field, and they're also working on the methanogens. Next slide, please. Professor Ala Tabor, she's an animal biotechnologist, and our group is working on a range of high throughput omics techniques to study the tick resistance in cattle. We are also working on developing vaccines. Our vaccine is in clinical trial now. So we are doing animal trials at Pinjarra Hills. So if you're interested to do some field work as well as lab work, we will welcome you. We are also using the next generation sequencing technologies to develop the tick genome quickly. And our group is also working to develop diagnostic methods for the cough loss methods and the Campylobacterium in cattle. Next slide, please. Dr. Lewis is a ruminant nutrition specialist, and he is working on recycling of nitrogen as a determinant for feed efficiency in different cattle breeds. And he's also working on nutritional modulation for the transfer of passive immunity in cattle. So he's applying a range of high throughput technologies, including mass spec analysis. Most of the work is based at Gatan. So if you are interested to work away from the city and working to the field, probably in the best guy to contact. Next, please. Associate Professor Mary Fletcher, she's an organic chemist. She introduced herself earlier. She's an organic chemist. She's working on identifying toxic plants in cattle and how to mitigate their toxicity to avoid the cattle at pastures. She's also working on determining the bioactive contents of the Australian native bee honey. Next, please. Dr. Connie Turney is a microbiologist. She is based at the Ecoscience Precinct, and her group is working on respiratory bacterial pathogens of livestock, poultry, and the wildlife. And they use different techniques like the serology, genotyping, sequencing, and they're also a reference laboratory in the region for doing the antimicrobial resistance testing and the sequencing for these pathogens. Next, please. Professor Tim Mahoney is a virologist, and his group is working on characterization of the bovine viral pathogens. They are also working on gene editing technologies to improve the animal resistance to various infections. And His group is particularly working on bovine herpes viruses. So you can find a complete list of the projects that are available from Center of Animal Science. If you're interested to join, we will welcome you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. So we have some PhD students from each of the institutes. So James, if you're still there, do you want to unmute and give us your perspective of being a student at ARBN?
Yep, no worries. G'day everyone. So a bit of background perspective. I did a chemical engineering degree in Canterbury of New Zealand. So I did my honours through that, and then spoke with Esteban, who you heard present some projects, and came over a couple of years ago. And so one of the big things that I noticed moving over here was the amount of resources and the opportunities that really come with that. And I think that's quite a big thing to consider. There's far less barriers to doing what you want to do, which is pretty cool. And so a lot of what you've heard is massive diversity in the projects that are available, and I think is also there is also a massive diversity in the people that are doing those projects. And so I'd really encourage you to try and ask lots of questions and just learn as much as you can while you're there, and yeah, gain the experience while you're there. And one of the other things that a few people have also said is a great balance between the kind of industrial research and academic research. And that is quite important, I think, for getting an idea of what you want to do after your honours, after your PhD, wherever you go afterwards. And then, so for me, my honours was my favourite bit of my undergraduate. And it's really great being able to apply what you've learned over the last couple of years and get a better feeling for how that's actually used. And then just quickly on the student committees, which is why I'm here. So IMB, QAAFI, ARBN and the SCMB all have student committees. And through these, we try to encourage a good work-life balance, some networking, and as well as some professional development. And I would really encourage you to try and get involved in those while you're there, not necessarily as a committee member or anything, but just show up to events and yeah, talk to some people. Cheers.
Thanks, James. That was great. Sophie, do you want to give the IMB perspective?
Yep, sure. So I'm Sophie. I'm a first-year PhD student in Nathan Palpin's lab, who talked earlier, and I did my honours there as well last year. And so I think honours for me was like a chance to see what research was like and see if it was for me. And I mean, since I'm still here, clearly it was. And I think during my honours year, I really got the chance to try a lot of different things. So I got to combine my wet lab and dry lab background, or I guess interests, in my project. And I did this big single-cell RNA sequencing experiment to look at the gene regulation involved in heart development. And I think my project let me learn lots and lots of different fields and types of techniques from wet lab stuff, so just like cell biology, tissue culture, flow cytometry, and then also really develop my skills in bioinformatics to use other people's programs, and also to adapt and make my own to analyze this data set. And so yeah, I do think that being in the IMB and being around so many other like ambitious and just collaborative people really helped me be able to pull off this type of big project. And yeah, I do think that also being around so many other research interests and research fields, you really get to see all the different ways you can attack different scientific questions and what questions you can ask, and yeah, and just really see what possibilities are out there. And so yeah, I really recommend doing an honours year. It was a really good experience.
Thank you, Sophie. So our final student is Harrison from QAAFI.
Yeah, g'day. Thanks a lot for having me. So I'm a first year PhD student in QAAFI Centre for Animal Science, and I did a Bachelor of Biotechnology and finished my honours last year, and I was working on bioinformatics applied to livestock for animal welfare. I absolutely loved my experience doing honours at QAAFI, and if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here where I am today doing my PhD, because I'd actually never considered a career in research up until I started doing my honours. I think there's two things to look for when you're choosing where you want to do your honours, and that's look for supportive supervisors, but also a supportive student network. And that's one thing that I loved about QAAFI was my supervisors were just amazingly supportive the entire way through my honours. But they pushed me pretty hard to maintain a high standard of work, which really helps with the final outcome of your honours. You know, you develop as an undergrad student, and you get to a point where you're pretty much ready to start submitting papers, which is quite exciting. And QAAFI Student Association was the other thing that sort of hooked me. And in the last few years, it's become very active. And I think that's a vital thing for honours students, because you're sort of segregated from the rest of uni when you're not doing lectures and tutorials. So having a supportive student network there is really, really important. And that was one of my favourite things about doing honours with QAAFI. And just finally, I think everyone at QAAFI encouraged me to take and seize any opportunities that came along. And that was fantastic, because it meant I got to go to enter different competitions, like poster competitions and workshops, and also travel to a few different conferences, which is a massive part of developing as a student, because you get to develop your networking abilities, but also develop those presentation skills that can be so vital in the real world when you go out, whether that be applying for an industry job or continuing research. So that's all from me, and I couldn't recommend QAAFI enough. And if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free to just send me a message. Cheers.
Thanks, Harry. That was great. So I'm cognizant of the time, so it's time to wrap the session up now. So thank you, everyone, for dialing in. Please feel free to directly email any of the participants if you'd like more information, or arrange a one-on-one meeting to discuss a project. In addition, please take a look at the websites for each of the institutes. As you've seen, there's lots of other projects and information about researchers and research areas. So please go ahead and do that. Otherwise, please go on and join the SEMB honour session that's on now as well. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone.